On the morning of September 13th, 1982, Grace Kelly packed a row of dresses flat across the rear seat of a metallic green Rover 3500 and made a decision that would end her life and destroy 3 others. The back seat was full, no room for a chauffeur. Her driver offered to make a separate trip for the clothes. She declined. Her 17-year-old daughter, Stéphanie, climbed into the passenger seat. They pulled away from their country home at Roc Agel at approximately 10 a.m. 20 minutes later, a witness 50 yards behind the Rover watched it swerve violently across both lanes, then straighten out and accelerate, hard, into a curve it couldn't survive. He saw no brake lights. Police who swept the road afterward found no skid marks. What happened inside that car in those seconds is what doctors at Monaco Hospital later reconstructed. Grace had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage before the crash, not from it. The stroke rendered her incapable of braking. The Rover went over the edge and dropped 100 feet down the mountainside. Stéphanie's account of what followed is precise and devastating. She found herself folded under the glove compartment, lost consciousness as the car fell, woke to see smoke rising from the engine. She bashed the door open with her legs. She ran out onto the road, grabbed a woman standing there, and screamed, "Please get help! Call the palace! I'm Princess Stéphanie! Call my father and get help!" She was 17 years old, had a hairline fracture in a cervical vertebra, a concussion, and spinal injuries severe enough to temporarily paralyze one side of her body. She got out. Her mother didn't. Grace reached Monaco Hospital unconscious at 10:30 a.m. Dr. Louis Chatelaine examined her and stated she had suffered 2 brain hemorrhages, one before the impact, one as a result of it. Technically, brain dead from both. The palace's press office issued a statement that afternoon. Stable condition, a few broken bones. That was a lie. The family removed life support at approximately 10:55 p.m. on September 14th. Stéphanie wasn't told her mother was dead for 2 full days. She was still hospitalized when Grace's funeral broadcast reached roughly 100 million viewers on September 18th. Stéphanie didn't attend. She lay in a hospital bed while dignitaries filed past the coffin, while Princess Diana, 21 years old, 13 months into her own royal life, represented the Queen. The palace had managed the press statement. It had not managed to get a 17-year-old girl to her mother's funeral. That is the first institutional failure on record. It wouldn't be the last. What the palace did in the days immediately following was blame the car's brakes. Monaco officials claimed brake failure caused the crash. Rover's engineers flew in from Britain, inspected the car, found no evidence of mechanical fault, and demanded a retraction. The palace issued it on September 20th, a week after the crash. In the gap between the false story and the correction, another narrative was already circulating. That Stéphanie had been driving. She hadn't been. The physical evidence was unambiguous. Stéphanie's injuries were consistent with the passenger seat. The door on her side was, in her own words, completely smashed in. She escaped from the driver's side, the only side accessible. The witness described a car that accelerated without driver input, consistent with a medical event. The palace knew all of this. Rainier himself told biographer Jeffrey Robinson in 1989, "When they keep rehashing the story that Stéphanie was driving and they know it's not true, it hurts all of us. The point is, people don't know to what extent Stéphanie has suffered." He said that in 1989, 7 years after the crash. The palace had mounted no sustained public defense of her in the interim. Stéphanie told Robinson the same year, "There was a lot of pressure on me because everyone was saying that I had been driving the car, that it was all my fault, that I'd killed my mother. It's not easy when you're 17 to live with that." She also said, Everybody looks at you and you know they're thinking, how come she's still around and Grace is dead? No one ever said it to me like that, but I knew that's what they were thinking. She didn't say, I wasn't driving, to a major publication until October 2002. 20 years. That is how long the palace let the rumor stand. To understand why that silence was so lethal, you have to understand the environment these children grew up in before the crash took everything apart. Princess Caroline, born January 23, 1957. Prince Albert, born March 14, 1958. Princess Stéphanie, born February 1, 1965. All three were raised in one of the most formally suffocating environments in Europe. The Monegasque Palace wasn't a home in any conventional sense. It was an institution with uniforms, protocols, and a public schedule that absorbed both parents. Caroline's own words on her upbringing. I was raised with a sense of duty, obedience, and guilt. What I had to do always came before what I wanted to do. Caroline went further. By her own account, she and Albert were closer to their nanny Maureen Wood than to either parent. For my brother and me, Maureen was the key figure in our life, she admitted. When we were little, we were probably closer to our nanny than to our parents. When Wood went on vacation, the children begged her not to go and were sad for days. Grace frequently called Wood back early from holiday. Albert was so attached that Wood's son later became a member of his first bobsled team. Grace wasn't absent. She was warm in ways Rainier wasn't, and protective of Stéphanie in particular. But she was also trapped. Close friend Joan Dale described her as feeling somewhat like a prisoner in a gilded cage behind the palace walls. By the summer of 1982, Caroline noted her mother was tired and not in great form. Grace had given a 2020 interview to ABC on June 22nd, just 3 months before her death, and said, I suppose I think mostly in terms of my children and their children, how they will remember me. She was the only human element in a palace built on ceremony. When she died, Rainier collapsed inward. He never remarried. He buried himself in grief and statecraft. The children, 2 adults, 1 teenager with a fractured spine, were left without whoever had been holding things together. The world didn't give them space to fall apart. The world had a myth to maintain. Grace Kelly's image had been public property since her Hollywood years, and by 1982, it had calcified into something almost devotional. The American actress who became a real princess, the fairy tale made literal. Her death didn't dissolve that myth. It intensified it. She was now frozen at 52, luminous forever, incapable of disappointment. Dead, she was more valuable to Monaco than she had ever been alive. The principality's economy ran on glamour, tourism, the casino, Formula One, luxury real estate, and Grace Kelly was the face of that brand. An honest accounting of what her death had done to 3 actual people would have undermined the story Monaco needed the world to believe. So the palace chose the story. Caroline turned 25 in 1982. She had already endured 1 failed marriage, Philippe Junot in 1978, against her mother's explicit objections, divorced in 1980, still without a church annulment when Grace died. By December 1982, 3 months after the funeral, Rainier had formally appointed Caroline to lead the Princess Grace Foundation, the Garden Club of Monaco, and the Springtime Arts Festival. He gave her her dead mother's ceremonial job. She was 25 and still in early grief, and the palace handed her a desk and called it an honor. She held it. On December 29, 1983, she married Stefano Casaraghi, Italian industrialist's son, competitive offshore powerboat racer, in a civil ceremony beneath a portrait of Grace. 3 children in 4 years. Andrea in June 1984, Charlotte in August 1986, Pierre in September 1987. By every available account, this was the stable chapter of Caroline's life. Casiraghi had promised to retire from racing after the 1990 season. On October 3, 1990, his boat, the Pino di Pino, hit a wave at approximately 100 miles per hour near Cap Ferrat. The boat flipped. Race organizer Gianfranco Rossi stated Casiraghi was killed instantly, strapped to his seat. His co-pilot, Innocenti, was thrown clear and survived. Caroline was 33, widowed for the first time, with 3 children under 7, in the same country, 8 years and 3 weeks after watching her mother die. She buried Casiraghi in Monaco's Cathedral of St. Nicholas, the same cathedral where Grace's funeral had been held 8 years prior. The press reached immediately for the supernatural. The Grimaldi curse, drawn allegedly from a 13th century legend, suddenly explained everything. It was considerably easier than the real explanation. A traumatized family was being denied the basic architecture of recovery: time, privacy, institutional support. Caroline got none of those. She got a title to carry, a foundation to run, and cameras trained on her face while she tried to raise 3 children without their father. She eventually married Prince Ernst August of Hanover in 1999, in a relationship multiple observers described as volatile. Ernst was publicly photographed in outbursts that included breaking a cameraman's nose. Caroline's choice of him says less about her judgment and considerably more about what 3 decades of loss and ceremonial performance do to a person's capacity to protect themselves. Albert's trajectory looks different from the outside because he held the throne. What it actually represents is someone who understood, early, completely, that intimacy was the most dangerous thing available to him, and avoided it with systematic consistency for 3 decades. He attended Amherst College, competed on Monaco's Olympic bobsled team across 5 Winter Games from 1988 to 2002, and cultivated a bachelor reputation so durable, it started to feel architectural. Brooke Shields, Naomi Campbell, Claudia Schiffer, Gwyneth Paltrow. None of it lasted. None of it was intended to. Albert was the heir. He performed the role without performing the vulnerability attached to it. In March 1992, a waitress named Tamara Jean Rotolo gave birth to a daughter in Palm Springs, California. The girl was named Jasmine Grace Grimaldi. Albert didn't acknowledge her for 14 years. Jasmine didn't meet her biological father until she was 11 years old. Albert's lawyer confirmed the relationship in June 2006, telling the press that the situation was becoming unbearable for her, meaning the paparazzi had already found her at her Palm Desert school, and silence was no longer operationally viable. In August 2003, Albert's son Alexander was born to Nicole Coste, a Togolese Air France flight attendant Albert had been involved with since approximately 1997. Coste went to Paris Match in May 2005, with photographs of Albert holding the infant, because he had not fulfilled his promise to register as the child's father following Rainier's death. Albert confirmed paternity on July 5, 2005, days before his formal enthronement as Prince Albert II. Neither Alexander nor Jasmine hold succession rights under Monaco's 2002 constitution. Rainier had died on April 6, 2005, after successive failures of the heart, kidneys, and lungs. He was buried beside Grace. Albert was enthroned on July 12, 2005, at age 47, and the question the principality had been circling for decades was now unavoidable. Who would he marry, and when? The answer was Charlene Wittstock, a former South African Olympic swimmer who had met Albert at Monaco's Mare Nostrum competition in 2000. She moved to Monaco roughly 4 years before their July 2011 wedding, in conditions she later described with uncomfortable candor: no job, no French, and Two people I consider friends in all of Monaco, as she told Tatler. French newspapers, Le Journal du Dimanche and L'Express, reported that in the days before the wedding, Charlene had attempted to leave 3 separate times, once seeking refuge at the South African Embassy in Paris during a dress fitting, once during the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, and once intercepted, apparently en route to Nice Airport, carrying a one-way ticket home. The palace denied everything. Charlene cried throughout the ceremony. The palace denied that, too. What the palace can't deny is the pattern. 3 children, 3 different kinds of collapse, 3 iterations of the same institutional logic. Protect the brand, manage the release, let the individual absorb the damage. Stephanie's driving rumor ran for 20 years without a formal sustained palace rebuttal. Caroline was handed her dead mother's ceremonial role 3 months after the funeral, with no visible consideration of what that demanded. Albert's children were acknowledged only when public exposure made silence untenable. Never with the directness that might have protected Hasmin from being identified by photographers at her school, rather than claimed by her father. The palace's arithmetic was consistent. Monaco was worth more as a myth than as a family. Every honest accounting of what Grace's death had done to the people who actually loved her would erode the story the principality sold to the world. That isn't a curse. It's a management strategy with human casualties. Stephanie gave Perry Match her most complete account of the crash in October 2002, 2 decades after the fact. "I wasn't driving, that's clear," she told journalist Denise Torrado. "In fact, I was thrown around inside the car like my mother, who was catapulted onto the back seat. The passenger door was completely smashed in. I got out on the only accessible side, the driver's." She also said, "I can't take it anymore. All these calumnies that have been spoken and written have sustained a non-existent mystery." She was 37 when she said that. 20 years of carrying a story that was never hers. The reckless teenager, the one who drove her mother off the cliff, the one who survived when Grace didn't. The marriages, the children by multiple fathers, the years in circus caravans alongside Franco Kani's elephant training operation. All of it processed by the press as evidence of instability, proof that Stephanie was the damaged one, the embarrassment. What it actually was, what she articulated herself as early as 1989, was isolation. "I needed my mother a lot when I lost her," she told Robinson, "and my dad was so lost without her. I felt so alone. I just went off to do my own thing." The Ducrouet marriage collapsed in September 1996, when he was photographed with a woman named Muriel Moll-Hudeman, the encounter captured in a 90-minute video that left no ambiguity. Ducrouet denied it, then fled to Morocco. They divorced October 4, 1996. Stephanie had 2 children at that point, Louis, born November 1992, and Pauline, born May 1994. She married the acrobat Adans Lopez Perez in a private Switzerland ceremony in September 2003 and divorced him 14 months later. She never found solid ground. She is still looking. What she never received was an apology. Not from the tabloids that blamed her for the crash, not from a palace that watched the rumor calcify while protecting its image, not from a system that handed 3 traumatized children the full weight of a legend and called it inheritance. In September 2022, Albert gave People magazine a statement on the 40th anniversary of his mother's death. "Many times during a day, a week," he said, "not only do I find myself thinking of her, what an exceptional human being she was." It was a perfectly calibrated quote. Gracious, measured, appropriate. The Grace Kelly brand, sustained even in grief, 40 years on. Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie were never going to emerge from this hole. The childhood environment that made Maureen Wood their central emotional anchor, more present than either parent, had established the fragility long before September 1982. Grace's death didn't create the wound. It removed the one person who might have helped them survive it, and then the institution she'd married into replaced her with a myth far more useful than a mother. The Grimaldi curse didn't kill Stefano Casaraghi. A powerboat hit a wave at approximately 100 miles per hour. The curse didn't drive a Rover off the D37 mountain road. A stroke did. The curse didn't spend 20 years blaming a 17-year-old girl for her mother's death. Newspapers did that, and a palace that said almost nothing useful to stop them. Stephanie still won't travel the D37 road, even as a passenger. She always asks the driver to take another route. That is the wound the palace never addressed, not because it couldn't, but because addressing it would have required admitting what actually happened. A girl survived a crash that killed her mother. She was hospitalized when they buried her mother. She was blamed for her mother's death for 2 decades. She was given no meaningful institutional protection while she tried to construct a life inside all of that. Monaco chose the myth. It chose it in September 1982, and again in December 1982, and again through every palace statement that prioritized image over the 3 people most entitled to something honest. Grace Kelly looks down from hotel lobbies and souvenir shops and documentary thumbnails. Flawless, permanent, untouchable. Her children grow older in tabloid photographs, still carrying her weight, still sorted and resorted by a public that preferred the princess to the imperfect, surviving humans she left behind. Subscribe for more stories like this.